Good afternoon. Welcome to a tertiary world. Today I'm reading the last few memories from Victoria Street, the first East-West Street, first of 7 East-West Streets, and one of 14 streets that make up a grid inside which I've lived most of my life. In 2008 I walked down each street in order to retrieve the first 7 memories that arose as I walked. This is a memory of 366 Victoria Street. The colour of Victoria Street is red, and this is a yellow memory. Originally, Mantello's shoe store had occupied these premises. Because it was located opposite my mother's workplace, it became the family's shoe store. I bought 2 pairs there over 8 or 9 years, the only shoes I owned, apart from my football boots. One late Friday afternoon, I saw Albert Mantello, one of the store's 2 owners, cross Victoria Street, dressed in a blue suit and tie, a big black shock of hair flopping around in the chill westerly blowing up from Dynon Road. Albert played in the centre for North Melbourne and was the captain of the side for a few years. He was one of a handful of Italians that played league football, and I really looked up to him. I knew nothing about him except that he was brave, but they were all tough. Sergio Silvagni, John Benetti, Frank Curcio, Tony Ongarello, and especially Ron Barassi. They seemed unperturbed by all the vilification that came their way. I tried to be like them, untouched and strong, but I didn't do very well. I remember once seeing a match televised live, something very rare in those days. It must have been around 1958. Albert had his head cut open and he wore a big white bandage around his forehead with a blooming red rose of his wound imprinted right in its centre. He strode across the mud flats magnificently, casting the fear of God into anyone that went near the ball. But eventually, Mantello's shoe store moved to an outer suburb, and the Lamberti brothers moved in to establish their music store. For years, a moody, sad-looking middle-aged man always sat behind the counter, reading Italian music magazines. Lamberti stocked the first Italian records to be imported to Australia, as well as a range of pianos, accordions, guitars, and shiny drum kits. But the smell of fresh leather never entirely left the store, and I would occasionally visit it so I could take in the aroma of its long-gone shoes. A few years ago, I found myself walking past and I decided to enter simply out of curiosity. Albert Mantello was sitting at a piano in the corner, and though he was much older, I recognized him immediately. I gathered from the sparse conversation he was having with the storekeeper that he wanted to buy a piano for his daughter. He was sitting at the only grand on display, touching the keys very gently. I caught a glimpse of his hands as I walked slowly past, and they seemed surprisingly small and puffy. I couldn't help but stop close by, pretending I was interested in the large range of electric guitars, all displayed in a long row behind him. He sat as if in a dream. The sound of his fingers and palms brushing along the keyboard seemed suddenly much louder than the sound that the keys themselves were making. He was clearly not responding to the incessant chit-chat the sales assistant kept making. Someone, perhaps the owner, appeared in the doorway of the store's office and motioned to the assistant. He walked over with arms raised in frustration. Both stood in the doorway for a minute or two, speaking in low tones. Suddenly, Albert now laid his hands on the keyboard, his thick shock of white hair draped over the piano keys. He kept moving his fingers all along the keyboard at the level of his head. finally making the kind of sounds he had really intended to make all along. The intersection of Victoria and Elizabeth, the colour is violet. I have always believed this to be the most lively and interesting intersection in Melbourne, opposite Victoria Market and on the edge of the city, close to the exhibition gardens. 6 streets intersect here, and with 3 tram lines crossing each other's routes, the resulting traffic is relentless. I've always fancied living inside the exquisite Italianate 3-storey building housing the Rechabites Hall on the corner of Victoria and Elizabeth Streets. Until one day, not so long ago, I noticed a balcony on the top floor of its building opposite. This had once been a National Bank office and most only recently have been transformed into an apartment block. I imagine sitting on the top floor balcony on summer nights, watching it all unfold below me. And on Saturday mornings, watching people arrive early, pushing and carrying shopping trolleys into the market. Rain that would be beautiful to watch from up there, sheeting over the city and onto the market's roof, then onto the streets, into 1,000 rivulets, each carrying before it whatever it happened to find along its path, before rolling, falling, flowing deep beneath the pavements. Under here, this immense detritus gathers itself all together into a new body and prepares to begin the journey to elsewhere. The journey to elsewhere. Tomorrow I'll read you the last memory that I remembered of 7 along Victoria Street, and then I begin with Elgin Street, the second east-west street. Its colour is orange. Until then, have a lovely Sunday.